First of all, the underlying discourse, the narrative, the conceptual capital we developed to frame the questions that we're concerned with. And secondly, what you might think of as the constitutive institutions, the kind of basic institutional structure of international society with respect to these issues. And thirdly, the kind of organizational details. Should UNEP have universal membership? Should UNEP have a somewhat larger budget and so on? My sense is that the conference, to the extent that it had substance, very little substance, but to the extent it had substance, focused really on the third component, that is kind of tinkering with the details of these existing organizational arrangements, which in a very real sense I think is a kind of exercise in fiddling while Rome burns. In reality, it seems to me that we need to turn the equation around. We need to really think hard about discourses, narratives. I'm not so sure it's a matter of norms that people stress, but the fact is that we now are operating in the Anthropocene. We are operating on an Earth which is a human-dominated system. And that means that for the first time on a very large scale, what happens to the planet is in some fundamental sense a consequence of human action. And we therefore require a different way of thinking about our own behavior, thinking about how we relate to the planet. So we can come back to this in the discussion, but we really need to be moving towards some fundamental narrative that's based on a notion of planetary stewardship. Not frankly just a matter of sustainable development. When it comes to constitutive institutions, we really need to have some adjustment in how we think about the nature and the properties of sovereignty when it comes to these kinds of questions of planetary stewardship. Now you may say, oh well, that's out of the question. Sovereignty is sacrosanct. We can't really make these sorts of adjustments. But the reality is that sovereignty itself is a social institution. It does change. It has changed significantly over time. It is significant that we have gone from national security to collective security and included Chapter 7 in the UN Charter. It hasn't solved all the problems, but it's not a trivial development. It is significant that we've gone from autarky to international economic cooperation with the kinds of understandings about the limitations on the sovereignty of individual members of international society that entails. And it is, I think, possible that we could move in the direction of a common understanding that we need to place certain limitations, certain restrictions, not just in terms of whether UNEP has universal membership, but some somewhat more fundamental restrictions on, so shall we say, environmental sovereignty. Now, coming to the question of the future of conference diplomacy, the last set of comments here, Stockholm made a difference because it put environmental issues on the agenda. It's no longer just war and peace and economics and to some extent human rights, but now we have this as an issue domain, a recognized issue domain. Rio 1992 made a difference because it really didn't initiate but incorporated the discourse of sustainable development. And there's no question that that has played a very significant role in how we've sort of shaped a lot of our activities in the last 20 years. I would argue that in the final analysis, as we move deeper into the Anthropocene, facing a world of planetary boundaries, that we will discover that the discourse of sustainable development in some sense has failed. That is to say, it's not only a question of our inability to, in a sense, operationalize this discourse, but it doesn't really point us in the direction of a new understanding of the relationship between human action and the planet. And I think that we will move, as we move deeper into the Anthropocene, toward a recognition of the importance of shifting our understanding of this relationship. The real question, of course, is the extent to which we need some kind of catastrophic event to make this happen. I mean, after all, in the economic realm, we had the Great Depression of the 1930s. In the security realm, 2 world wars of the 20th century. In the realm of human rights, massive loss of life as a result of various kinds of authoritarian actions. So the question is, what will it take to trigger? Does there need to be some kind of catastrophe to be a tipping point in this respect? But when we are ready, when we've reached a certain ripeness with respect to changing the underlying discourse and making suitable adjustments in the constitutive institution, then I think a conference a global conference of this sort could play a really important role in the recognition and articulation and kind of ratification of this new way of addressing human-environment relationships. And until that time, more conferences won't make any difference at all. And are not the cost, the benefits don't outweigh the cost. But there will come a time, I think, when such a conference will make a major difference.
Thank you, Gordon. It's always interesting to listen. Maria.
Thank you, Shannon. I would like to preface my remarks by sharing a story of where I come from in making the remarks that I will make, because it's important to understand where we sit and from what place we're actually analyzing and interpreting the same event. You're hearing different views about exactly the same event. And it's the spectacles we have on, the experiences that we bring on that color our own interpretations. I entered this debate in the late 90s, being a firm proponent of what we called at the time a global environment organization. I'm still convinced GEO is a much better acronym than a World Environment Organization, WEO. But I have moved on in terms of the support for the underlying need for such an organization. And it's because of one of my committee members while I was doing my dissertation, who was sitting right there across from me, Ben Cashore. So to all of you PhD students here, it really matters who's on your committee. Because I came in and said, yes, I want to argue that we need a global environment organization. And Ben said, well, I think you should answer the question of why don't we have one? Oh, yes, exactly. Why don't we have a World Environment Organization? Was a much better research topic. And that led me into the archives of the UN in New York, in Geneva, in Nairobi. It led me into the living rooms of a number of men, primarily, a few women, who were there at the beginning when UNEP was being designed, right before the Stockholm Conference, because it too had a 2-year preparatory process from 1970